Hello everybody, welcome to another knowledge lesson. Before we talk about what we're going to learn about today, I want to talk about something we learned about in an earlier lesson. In an earlier lesson, we learned about these three men. These are famous Greek philosophers. We have Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Remember, Plato learned from Socrates and wrote down all of his ideas so that we can still study them today. Plato gave us the term academy for school, and we still use the classifications for different plants and animals that Aristotle created. These three philosophers, these three men, gave us a lot of important contributions. A lot of their ideas and writing are still studied and read today. I'm going to put these three men under our contributions column to remind us of all of the important knowledge and writing that they contributed that we still read today. I'm going to put it right next to the Olympics up here. We'll cover our spelling words for a little bit, but that's okay. We can always move them. These men were important leaders of thought. They gave people lots of important ideas on how to think and act. But they weren't political leaders like Pericles. Today, we are going to learn about a political leader, but first I want to go over the vocabulary words that we'll see. Ambitious. Ambitious means having a strong desire for success or achievement. The ambitious salon owner was willing to work hard for her new business. Devoted. To be devoted to something means to feel a strong loyalty or commitment to it. The devoted couple celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with their family and friends. Retreat. To retreat is to withdraw or go back. The barking dog caused the little boy to retreat from the fence. Tame. Tame means to train to obey people. Some animals are impossible to tame and should remain in nature. When we read about folktales, we read about Pecos Bill, who tamed a mountain lion. We know this is an exaggeration because a mountain lion is an animal that cannot be tamed. I'm going to list a couple of other animals. I want you to tell me if it would be possible to tame it. Could you tame a litter of kittens sleeping in a box? Probably. What about a nest of baby birds chirping in a tree? What about gorillas in a jungle? What about a dog scratching at your door? To the north of the Greek city-states and of Mount Olympus lay the territory known as Macedonia. The Macedonian king, Philip II, watched and waited as the Greek city-states struggled among themselves for power and wealth after the Persian Wars. It seemed that they could work together brilliantly when they faced a common enemy such as Persia, but afterward they would go back to competing against one another. Away from all of these conflicts, King Philip grew stronger. Remember, conflicts are fighting or disagreements. King Philip noticed that the Greek city-states work together when they have a common enemy to face, but they go back to competing against one another once the enemy has been defeated. King Philip of Macedonia had a plan. He would let the rest of the Greeks wear themselves out fighting one another, and then he would lead his army south to unite all of Greece under his command. Do you think this plan will work? Philip also had a son whom he expected to follow in his steps and take over the throne one day. The boy was a bold, handsome, curly-haired youngster named Alexander. At first, Philip was a bit disappointed when it became clear that Alexander would not grow up to be a tall, strapping fellow like his father. Philip wondered, how can someone Alexander's size become a great warrior and commander like, well, like me. He soon realized that he had nothing to worry about. Alexander was determined to be the best at everything he did. He constantly practiced with sword and spear hour after hour. Even full-grown soldiers told one another, "Keep your guard up when you practice against Prince Alexander, or you will find his sword point at your throat." Alexander trained himself to swim in icy rivers and run for miles without stopping. He became an excellent wrestler and a champion horseman, and was constantly challenging other riders. Do you think all of this practice that Alexander was putting in helped him succeed? I think it probably helped him a lot. But Alexander was more than strong and sturdy. He was intelligent too. Realizing this, Philip told his son, "I have arranged to have the greatest thinker in the world come here to teach you. He is the famous Aristotle. Treat him with respect." What do you remember about Aristotle? Who was he? We learned about him in our last lesson. He was one of our great thinkers or philosophers from ancient Greece. Why do you think King Philip wanted his son to study with him? Alexander came to love and honor the wise Aristotle, and tried to learn all that he could from him. Pleased with his student, Aristotle taught the prince more than science and mathematics. He also tried to pass along all that the Greeks, especially the Athenians, had learned about leading a civilized and well-balanced life. Alexander loved to study the poems of Pindar. Alexander listened when Aristotle taught him the importance of observing and studying facts before making decisions. There was another famous philosopher who shared this idea that we learned about, and his name was Plato. However, the prince's energetic nature caused him to use this lesson in ways far different from those that the quiet scientist had imagined. One famous example occurred when Alexander was in his early teens and set his eyes upon a magnificent horse named Bucephalus. Alexander told his father's groomsmen, "That is the horse I want to ride." The head groomsman bowed. "I'm sorry, Your Highness, I cannot let you, for your own safety. No one can ride Bucephalus. One of our greatest horsemen tried yesterday, and even he broke his leg." What do you think Alexander is going to do? Because he wants to ride this magnificent horse. What do you think he'll do? Alexander realized that he would have to use his mind as well as his muscles to tame the horse. "I must think this through," he told himself. He watched as one rider after another led the huge horse out to the wooden fence and tried to mount the saddle. Alexander noticed something no one else had seen. The prince realized why the big fellow is frightened each time he sees his own shadow moving before him on the ground. He becomes so nervous that he throws off anyone who tries to ride him. Alexander took some sugar out to the horse. "Here, boy, eat this," he said, and he turned Bucephalus around in the other direction so that he was facing the sun and could not see his own shadow. Then Alexander easily climbed into the saddle. Everyone was amazed. Alexander rode the huge horse all afternoon. Even King Philip came out to watch, grinning at his son. "He's not so bad," called Alexander, grinning back. Finally, Bucephalus trusted Alexander so much that the boy could lead him to do anything, even with his shadow in front of him. Bucephalus became Alexander's horse, and Alexander so loved the horse that he later named a city after him. How did Alexander tame the horse that no one else was able to tame? Did he use his strength, or did he use his intelligence? Soon Alexander was leading troops into battle for his father. He developed a habit that stayed with him all his life. He always rode in the front line of fighters. The soldiers were proud of their brave prince and loved him for taking risks as great as those he asked them to take. A number of times, when a battle might have been lost, Alexander would yell, "Charge!" and ride ahead. His devoted soldiers would think, "We cannot let him be killed or captured." They had no choice but to follow him and win the battle, for they knew that Alexander would never retreat. At last, King Philip felt that he and his son were ready to conquer the Greeks who were south of Macedonia. Then, by a stroke of good luck, they found a better way. Their old foe, or enemy, Persia, once again came after the Greek cities. Philip told the other leaders of Greece, "I will lead you against Persia." A few protested, but Philip and Alexander quickly invaded their cities and conquered them by force. People in the other city-states, weakened by war, were afraid to go up against the powerful Macedonian army. So King Philip was able to get what he wanted in the end. And then King Philip died. At the age of 20, Alexander became king of Macedonia. Although young in years, Alexander led his army through Greece, fighting and conquering when he needed to, and accepting surrender when he could. He generously gave gifts to the peoples and cities that welcomed him, while giving no mercy to those who opposed him. At last, all of Greece hailed Alexander as their king. But Greece was not enough for the ambitious king. He put one of his trusted advisors in charge of Greece and announced, "It is time to end the Persian threat once and for all, and to call Persia my own." With that, Alexander set out on his greatest adventure. Alright, we did not finish our story about Alexander the Great today. We'll keep reading about him in our next lesson. But we did talk a little bit about that important political leader. This is a picture of a statue of Alexander the Great. I'm going to put this under our leaders column to help us remember that he was an important leader in ancient Greece. Right now I want you to turn to whoever is helping you today and tell them what you know about him so far. Or how would you describe him based on what we read today? He was a great leader who was able to conquer ancient Greece and much of the surrounding area. And we'll talk more about that in our next lesson. Today I want to know, what lesson did Alexander learn from Aristotle? What did Aristotle teach him? Right. Aristotle taught him to study and observe everything around him before he made a decision, to make sure he had all of the facts and to know what he was deciding before he made a decision. While observation, Alexander used that lesson, and he made an observation about the wild horse, Bucephalus. How did he use that knowledge to tame the horse? What observation did he make to help him tame that wild horse? Right. He saw that the horse was afraid of his own shadow. So he turned the horse away from the sun so that he could not see his own shadow. And then he offered him some sugar to make the horse like and trust him. Why did Alexander's devoted soldiers think that he was a brave fighter? Why did they think he was a brave fighter? Alexander was brave. He rode in the front of his army instead of in the back like many leaders, and took the same risks that he asked his men to. He never retreated or gave up a fight. In our domain about ancient China, we learned about Confucius, and we talked about the saying, learning by example. Confucius thought that there were many things you could learn by example,
And we also talked about the phrase, practice what you preach. I think Alexander the Great probably is demonstrating practicing what he's preaching when he's taking the same risks that his men are and fighting right alongside them. Our last one, I want you to turn and tell whoever is helping you today, why do you think Alexander is still known as Alexander the Great even today? All right, my friends, when you are done, go ahead and open the PDF attached to this assignment. I'm going to show you what to do.
All right, for our assignment today, we're going to use the bubble chart that we worked on yesterday. Here's the example that I put up in yesterday's assignment. I'm going to take all of my ideas in my bubble chart and I'm going to write them as a rough draft of a story or narrative. Because we're still learning how to write, our narratives will not be very long and they will be very simple stories. Go ahead and open up the PDF attached to this assignment. It should look like this, and make sure you have your bubble chart ready, and we will work on turning all of those ideas in the bubble chart into a narrative. In the first sentence on your narrative, you're going to tell me about your main character and where they live. Your main character, who they are, where they live. So that's going to be what's in the middle. My main character I named Linus, and I decided that he is a king who lives in Sparta. So on my first sentence, I am going to say Linus was a king who lived in Sparta. Linus was a king who lived in Sparta. On those next 3 lines, we're going to add some details about Linus and other descriptions that we put in our bubbles. The first thing I want to talk about is Linus's family that I created for him. Linus has a wife named Agatha and 2 children. I'm going to include that on my second sentence. These ones you can do in a different order if you would like. I'm going to do my family first. Linus has a wife named Agatha and 2 children named Rachel and Cyrus. Oops. There we go. Let's see, what's another detail I could say about Linus? In my plan, I talked a little bit about what Linus does every day. He meets with his councilmen, he makes laws, and he trains with his men, with his warriors. I'm going to write a sentence about what he does every day. Each day, Linus meets with his councilmen, makes laws, and trains with his men. Each day, Linus meets with his councilmen, makes laws, and trains with his men. I also said that Linus often fights in battles. Not always. That might not be something he does every day, but he often fights in battles. Remember, Sparta was focused on war, so they were fighting often. Because he fights in battles often, he's usually away from home. I'm going to put those into one sentence. Linus often, I'm going to say bravely, I'm going to add an extra detail, bravely leads his men in battles and is away from home. Linus often bravely leads his men in battles and is away from home. Your last sentence is going to be a concluding sentence. A concluding sentence is a last sentence that wraps up your story. Our story is all about who Linus was. So I'm going to look at my map at all of the details that I said about Linus, and I'm going to see if I can wrap up who he was in just one sentence. I think this detail right here, that he is proud of his Spartan warriors and to be a king, is a good way to end my story. I'm going to come back, and I'm going to say, Linus is proud of his city-state and of his Spartan warriors. Remember, these three in the middle, you can put your details in whatever order you would like. You can put your family at the bottom and what he does every day at the top. You get to choose. But your first sentence should introduce your character, where they live and what they do. And your last sentence should wrap up who your character is, should give me a snapshot or a view of who your character is and what's important to them. We will edit this in our next lesson. So before you turn this one in, make sure that you either take a picture of it or print it or save it somehow. We will edit it in our next lesson. When you have saved it or taken a picture of it or printed it, then go ahead and turn it in.